I'd always thought my life was a quiet masterpiece, painted in steady strokes of routine and trust. My name's Daniel Harper, a 38-year-old architect living in Portland, Oregon, with my wife, Claire. She's 35, a graphic designer with a laugh that could melt ice and eyes that seemed to hold secrets I never bothered to unravel. We'd been married for 9 years, together for 12, and our home, a sleek, modern two-story with floor-to-ceiling windows, was our sanctuary. Or so I believed. It started on a Thursday in late February, the kind of gray day where the clouds hang low and heavy. I'd come home early from a site inspection, my boots still caked with mud, expecting to find Claire hunched over her laptop, lost in some design project. Instead, the house was silent. Too silent. Her car was in the driveway, but the living room was empty, the kitchen untouched. A faint sound, a muffled laugh, drifted from upstairs. My stomach twisted, but I told myself it was nothing. She was probably on a call with a client or maybe her sister. I climbed the stairs, my hand brushing the smooth oak banister we'd picked out together at a salvage yard 5 years ago. The laugh came again, sharper this time, followed by a low murmur. It wasn't her sister's voice. It wasn't a client's either. The bedroom door was cracked open, just enough for me to see the edge of our bed. The bed we'd bought after months of saving, the one we'd laughed about assembling wrong the first time. Claire was there, her auburn hair spilling over the pillow. And next to her, tangled in the sheets we'd chosen together, was Ryan. Ryan Kessler, my best friend since college. I didn't move, couldn't. My chest tightened like someone had wrapped it in steel bands, and my vision blurred at the edges. They didn't see me. They were too caught up in each other, their movements slow and deliberate, like they'd done this before, like it was practiced. I stood there, frozen, watching the woman I'd built my life around share something with him that I thought was ours alone. The betrayal wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, intimate, and that made it worse. I slipped back downstairs, my legs numb, and sat on the couch. The clock ticked. Minutes stretched into an hour. When they finally came down, Claire's hair was mussed, her cheeks flushed. Ryan had that smug grin he always wore after winning a pickup game. "Hey, Dan," he said, casual as ever. "Didn't know you were home." Claire kissed my cheek, her lips cold, and asked if I wanted dinner. I nodded, mute, and watched them act like nothing had happened. That night, I lay awake next to her, her breathing soft and even, and felt the first spark of something dark ignite in me. Not sadness, not even anger. It was colder than that, sharper. I wasn't going to yell or leave or break things. No, I was going to dismantle them, piece by piece, and they wouldn't see it coming. The next morning, I woke up before Claire, the weight of what I'd seen pressing down on me like a physical thing. I made coffee the same way I always did, 2 scoops, black, no sugar, and sat at the kitchen island, staring at the steam curling off the mug. She came down in her robe, yawning, and smiled at me like she hadn't been wrapped around Ryan less than 12 hours ago. "Morning, babe," she said, pecking my forehead. I smiled back, tight-lipped, and said, "Morning." I went to work like nothing was wrong. My office downtown was a glass-walled box overlooking the Willamette River, and I spent the day sketching blueprints for a new library, my pencil moving mechanically. But my mind wasn't on the lines or angles. It was on them, on how long it had been going on why. Ryan and I had met at Oregon State, bonded over late-night study sessions and cheap beer. He'd been my best man, standing beside me as I vowed to love Claire forever. And now this. I started digging that afternoon. Subtle, quiet. I checked Claire's laptop while she showered, her password still the same, our anniversary 0614. Her emails were clean, too clean, like she'd scrubbed them. But her design software had a cloud backup, and there, buried in a folder labeled Client Mockups, I found it. A photo. Her and Ryan, arms around each other, grinning at some beach I didn't recognize. Time-stamped 3 months ago. My hands shook as I closed the file, but I didn't confront her. Not yet. At dinner, she chattered about a new project, oblivious to the storm building inside me. I nodded, asked questions, played the part. After she went to bed, I called Ryan. "Hey, man," I said, keeping my voice light. "You free tomorrow? Need your opinion on something." He laughed, said sure, and I hung up, my grip tight on the phone. I wasn't sure what I'd do yet, but I knew it wouldn't be quick. It wouldn't be kind. The next day, Ryan met me at a coffee shop near his apartment. He looked the same, tall, broad-shouldered, his blonde hair perpetually messy. "What's up?" he asked, sipping an espresso. I told him I was thinking of surprising Claire with a trip, asked if he'd help plan it. His eyes flickered just for a second, but he agreed. I watched him, memorizing every twitch, every lie. He thought he was safe. He wasn't. Over the next week, I built a web. Not the kind you see coming, but the kind that traps you before you realize you're caught. I kept Claire close, cooking her favorite meals: lasagna, roasted chicken, watching her eat and laugh like she hadn't shattered me. I complimented her designs, held her hand, let her think everything was fine. With Ryan, I was the same old Dan, joking, reminiscing, planning that fake trip. But behind it all, I was collecting. I got into his phone one night when he left it on my couch during a movie. Claire was out with friends, and I'd invited him over to catch up. He didn't suspect a thing. His passcode was his birthday, pathetic, and there they were, texts. Hundreds of them. "Miss you," she'd written 2 days ago. "Can't wait," he'd replied. Photos, too, some innocent, some not. I forwarded them to myself, deleted the evidence, and put the phone back before he noticed. Claire's patterns were next. She'd started leaving the house more. "Client meetings," she said. I followed her once, borrowing a coworker's car so she wouldn't spot mine. She didn't go to a studio. She went to Ryan's place, a brick loft downtown. I parked across the street, watched her slip inside, and stayed there until she left 2 hours later, her hair tousled, her smile smug. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Back home, I started planning. Revenge wasn't enough, I wanted ruin. I remembered a story Ryan had told me years ago, drunk at a bar. His biggest fear was losing everything. His job, his reputation, his charm. Claire's was simpler, being alone. I'd take those from them, but not with fists or shouting. I'd use what I knew, what they'd given me. That night, I kissed Claire goodnight, my lips brushing her forehead, and felt nothing but cold resolve. She slept soundly, unaware that I was already unraveling her world. 2 weeks in, I had a map of their lives. Claire's late nights at the studio matched Ryan's overtime at his marketing firm. They'd built a routine, thinking I was too busy or too trusting to notice. I wasn't. I'd started recording small things at first. A voice memo of Claire on the phone, giggling with someone she didn't name. A photo of Ryan's car outside our house when I was supposed to be at work. Evidence stacking up like bricks. I dug deeper. Ryan's firm had a public directory, and I found his assistant, Emily, on LinkedIn. She was young, eager, and after a polite email from a fake account, chatty. I posed as a headhunter, asked about Ryan's performance. "Oh, he's great," she gushed. "Always stays late, though. Must have a big project." I thanked her, hung up, and smiled. Late, sure. With my wife. Claire's design clients were trickier. She freelanced, so I couldn't call an office. But she'd mentioned a big contract with a local brewery, so I drove there one afternoon, claiming to be a friend dropping off a file. The manager blinked at me. "Claire? She finished that job last month." I nodded, left, and felt the pieces click together. She'd been lying for weeks, maybe months. At home, I kept up the act. I suggested a weekend getaway, just us, and watched her squirm. "Oh, I've got deadlines," she said, avoiding my eyes. I didn't push. Instead, I called Ryan, told him I'd booked a cabin for the surprise trip. "You should come," I said. "Bring someone if you want." He hesitated, then laughed. "Maybe I will." I bet he would. That night, I sat in my study, the house dark, and started the real work. Revenge wasn't just about exposure, it was about precision. I'd hit them where it hurt most, and I'd make sure they felt it for years. By mid-March, I'd perfected the mask. Claire would lean against me on the couch, her head on my shoulder, and I'd stroke her hair, my fingers steady even as my mind churned. Ryan came over for beers, clapping me on the back like we were still brothers. I laughed at his jokes, poured him another, and watched him sink deeper into the trap. They thought they were clever, but I was rewriting the game. I started with Ryan's career. He'd bragged once about a promotion, creative director, a cushy gig with a corner office. I knew his firm's CEO, Mark Hensley, from a networking event years back. Mark was old school, hated scandal. I drafted an anonymous email from a burner account, attaching one of the photos from Ryan's phone. Him and Claire, cozy at that beach. Thought you should know about your new director, I wrote. No threats, no demands, just the image. I hit send and waited. Claire's turn came next. She'd always craved admiration. Her designs, her style, her charm. I found her portfolio site, hacked it with a password she'd reused from an old email, our dog's name, predictable, and uploaded a new project. It was subtle. A mock ad campaign featuring her and Ryan. Their faces photoshopped onto a couple in a cheap motel. Caption, "Trust is overrated." I locked her out, changed the password, and watched her panic the next morning when a client called, confused. "What's this ad, Claire?" She fumbled, red-faced, and I pretended to help, suggesting a tech glitch. Ryan called me that afternoon, voice tight. "You hear anything weird at my work?" I played dumb. "No, man. Everything okay." He muttered something about rumors and hung up. I smiled, sipping my coffee. The cracks were forming. That night, Claire cried in my arms, saying she felt exposed. I held her, murmuring comfort, and thought about how much worse it would get. This was just the beginning. The first cracks in their perfect little world were subtle, but I saw them widen. Claire spent the next day on the phone, her voice sharp as she tried to explain the hacked portfolio to clients. "No, it's not mine. I don't know how it got there," she snapped, pacing the kitchen. I stood at the counter, chopping onions for dinner, my face a mask of concern. "That's awful, babe," I said, sliding her a glass of wine. She drank it fast, her hands trembling, and I wondered if she suspected anything. She didn't. Not yet. Ryan was quieter, too. He texted me less, his usual bravado replaced by short, clipped replies. I knew why. Mark Hensley had called him in. I'd confirmed it with a quick chat to Emily, his assistant, under my fake headhunter alias. "He's been stressed," she'd said. "Something about a meeting with the boss." I pictured Ryan squirming in that corner office, trying to explain the photo, and felt a flicker of satisfaction. It wasn't enough, though. I wanted more than cracks, I wanted collapse. I upped the ante that weekend. Claire had a gallery event, a chance to network with local artists and clients. She'd been buzzing about it for weeks, her chance to shine. I offered to help, ironing her dress, a sleek black number she loved, and driving her downtown. "You're the best," she said, kissing me before stepping out. I smiled, waved, and drove straight to Ryan's loft. He wasn't home, probably licking his wounds, so I let myself in with the spare key he'd given me years ago, back when trust meant something. Inside, I planted seeds. A pair of Claire's earrings, small, silver hoops she'd worn last month, left on his nightstand. A handwritten note in her looping script, forged from years of watching her doodle. "Can't wait to see you again." I tucked it under his pillow, subtle but damning. Then I took photos, his bed, her earrings, the note, and sent them to myself. Evidence for later. I locked up, drove home, and waited for Claire, the dutiful husband ready with a late-night snack. She came back glowing, chattering about compliments on her work. I nodded, poured her tea, and let her talk. Inside, I was already planning the next move. Ryan's ruin was in motion. Claire's was about to catch fire. Monday brought the first real blow. Ryan called me at noon, his voice ragged. "Dan, I'm freaking out. Someone's screwing with me at work." He said Mark had sidelined him, put his promotion on hold pending an investigation. The photo had done its job, but Ryan didn't mention Claire, just vague rumors about his conduct. I feigned shock. "That's insane, man. Who'd do that?" He didn't answer, just muttered about needing a drink. I told him to come over later. He agreed, desperate for a lifeline. Claire, meanwhile, was unraveling. Another client had dropped her, citing the portfolio mess. She sat at the dining table, head in her hands, her laptop open to a string of apologetic emails. "I don't get it," she said, tears welling up. "It's like someone's targeting me." I rubbed her shoulders, my touch gentle, and murmured, "We'll figure it out." She leaned into me, trusting, and I felt that cold spark flare brighter. Ryan arrived that evening, disheveled, his tie loose. He downed a beer in 3 gulps and rambled about jealous coworkers and anonymous tips. I listened, nodding, pouring him another. Claire joined us, her eyes red from crying, and the air thickened with their shared unease. They didn't look at each other, not directly, but I caught the glances, the silent panic. I suggested we watch a movie, something light, and they agreed, eager for distraction. Halfway through, I excused myself to grab snacks and slipped upstairs. Claire's phone was on the nightstand, unlocked. She'd gotten careless. I scrolled through her texts with Ryan, found a fresh one from that morning. "We need to be careful." His reply, "Too late." I smirked, forwarded it to myself, and deleted the thread from her end. Back downstairs, I handed out popcorn and watched them fidget, their lies fraying at the edges. That night, I lay awake, plotting. Ryan's job was teetering. Claire's reputation was crumbling. But it was still too small. I needed something bigger, something that would haunt them. The idea hit me Tuesday morning, sharp and clear, like a blueprint snapping into focus. I've been too gentle, chipping away when I should have been swinging a wrecking ball. Claire left for a meeting, another lie, and I followed her again, this time with a plan. She parked at Ryan's loft, same as before, and I waited, my camera ready. When she emerged an hour later, adjusting her scarf, I snapped photos, her flushed face, his silhouette in the window. Tangible proof, but I wouldn't use it yet. Back home, I called in a favor. My old college buddy, Nate, worked IT for a local news outlet. I fed him a story, a whistleblower tip about a marketing exec, Ryan, misusing company funds for personal trips. I sent the beach photo as evidence, blurred Claire's face, and let Nate run with it. He didn't ask questions. He owed me from years back. By Wednesday, a small article hit online. Local firm investigates creative director over alleged embezzlement. No names yet, but Ryan would know. He called me that afternoon, frantic. "Dan, it's everywhere. Someone's saying I stole money." His voice cracked, and I pictured him pacing, sweat beading on his forehead. "That's nuts," I said, calm as ever. "You need a lawyer?" He rambled about fixing it, hung up, and I leaned back, satisfied. The firm would dig now, his texts, his expenses. They'd find nothing, but the suspicion would stick. Claire felt it too. She came home late, pale, muttering about canceled contracts. "People are talking," she said, pouring wine with shaky hands. "They think I'm unprofessional." I hugged her, whispering reassurances, and slipped her phone from her pocket while she showered. A new text from Ryan. "This is bad. Meet tomorrow." I deleted it, replaced it with a fake reply from her. "We're done. Don't contact me." Sent. Blocked his number. Their bridge was burning and I held the match. By Thursday, the fallout was glorious. Ryan's firm suspended him. Temporary, they said. But the damage was done. He showed up at our house unannounced, eyes wild, banging on the door. "Dan, I need to talk." Claire was upstairs, oblivious, and I let him in, playing the concerned friend. He paced the living room, ranting about lies and setups. "Someone's out to get me," he said, hands in his hair. I offered him coffee, watched him gulp it down, and asked, "You think it's personal?" He froze, then nodded. Yeah, it feels like it." I didn't flinch. "That's rough, man. Any enemies?" He shook his head, clueless, and I almost laughed. Claire came downstairs then, startled to see him. "Ryan? What's going on?" He stammered, caught off guard, and I stepped in. "He's having a bad day. Work stuff." She nodded, hesitant, and retreated upstairs. I walked him out, clapped his shoulder, and said, Hang in there. He didn't see the blade behind my smile. That night, I struck Claire harder. Her biggest client, a boutique chain, had an annual showcase coming up. I'd overheard her pitching it weeks ago. Her pride and joy. Using her hacked portfolio logins, I emailed the chain's owner from her account. A rant about their cheap taste and amateur vision, signed with her name. By morning, her phone buzzed with a furious reply. Contract terminated. Reputation trashed. She sobbed in the kitchen, mascara streaking, and I held her, whispering, "It's okay. We'll fix this." Ryan texted her old number, unblocked from my end, begging to meet. I replied as her, "You ruined everything. Leave me alone." He stopped texting. I grinned. They were breaking apart and I was just getting started. Friday was chaos and I orchestrated every note. Ryan's suspension hit social media. Someone at his firm leaked it, and the comments piled up. Shady guy. Knew he was trouble. His charm, his lifeline was dissolving. Claire's showcase disaster spread too. Artists she'd networked with texted her condolences. Then distance. Heard about the email. One wrote, "Hope you're okay." She wasn't. She sat on the couch, staring at nothing, wine glass empty. I took it further. Ryan's loft had a landlord, a gruff guy I'd met once at a barbecue. I called him, anonymous, and reported suspicious activity. Late-night visitors, noise. "Might be trouble," I said. He grunted, promised to check. Hours later, Ryan texted me, frantic. "Landlord's evicting me. Says I'm a risk." I replied, "That's wild. Need a place to crash." He didn't answer. Claire's isolation deepened. I accidentally left her phone unlocked. A forged email from her sister, copied from old messages, saying, "I can't deal with your drama anymore." She read it, called her sister in tears, and got voicemail. I timed it. Her sister was on a flight, unreachable. Claire curled up, alone, and I watched, silent. That night, I sat in my study, their worlds in ashes around me. Ryan's career was gone, his home next. Claire's pride, her connections, shredded. But I wasn't done. The final act was coming, and it would be merciless. Saturday morning dawned cold and gray, mirroring the wreckage I'd built. Claire barely spoke, her eyes hollow as she scrolled through emails. More cancellations, more polite rejections. "I don't understand," she whispered, her voice cracking. I brewed her coffee, set it beside her, and said, "You'll bounce back." She didn't. Ryan was worse. I'd heard through Nate that his firm had fired him outright, the embezzlement rumor too toxic to ignore. His texts to me were desperate. "Dan, I'm drowning. Help me." I didn't reply. I shifted gears, aiming for their foundations. Ryan's parents lived an hour away, a tight-knit pair who'd always bragged about their golden boy. I'd met them at holidays, shared meals, earned their trust. Using a prepaid phone, I called his mother, disguising my voice with a slight drawl. "Ma'am, I work with Ryan." I lied. "Hate to say it, but he's in trouble, money stuff, maybe worse." "Thought you should know." She gasped, asked questions I dodged, and hung up. Hours later, Ryan called me, furious. "My mom's freaking out. Someone told her I'm a crook." I feigned shock. "That's awful, man. Who'd do that?" Claire's turn came that afternoon. Her best friend, Mia, was her anchor, chatty, loyal, always there. I cloned Claire's phone weeks ago, mirroring her texts. I sent Mia a message as Claire. "I've been lying to you. I don't need you anymore." Mia replied, hurt. "What's this about?" And I blocked her, deleted the thread from Claire's end. When Mia called later, ignored by a shell-shocked Claire, the silence grew. Claire tried calling back, got voicemail, and crumpled. "She hates me," she said, clutching her phone. I hugged her, my arms a cage, and murmured, "People drift." That night, I reviewed my work. Ryan's family was turning. Claire's last lifeline was cut. They were alone now, vulnerable. I slept soundly, dreaming of the end. Sunday was quiet, deceptively so. Claire stayed in bed, curtains drawn, her spirit fraying. I brought her tea, played the concerned husband, and watched her sip it, unaware I'd laced it with a mild sedative. Not enough to harm, just enough to dull her. She slept most of the day, leaving me free to tighten the noose. Ryan, meanwhile, was spiraling. His landlord had followed through, eviction papers served, his belongings boxed. He called me voice-breaking. "I'm out, Dan. Nowhere to go." I offered our guest room, knowing he'd refuse. He did, pride still clinging. I hit him harder. Ryan's car, a flashy Audi he'd financed, was his last shred of status. I kept a spare key from a road trip years back. Late that night, I drove to his loft, found the car in the lot, and slashed 2 tires, not obvious, just slow leaks. Then I called a towing company, posing as him, and reported it abandoned. By morning, it'd be gone. Impounded. Another loss. I imagined his face when he saw the empty spot. Confusion, then despair. Claire woke groggy, asking about her phone. "You left it downstairs," I lied, handing her the cloned version. I'd sent more texts as her. To her parents, her old college mentor vague, cutting messages. "I'm done with you." Replies trickled in, confused, then silent. She stared at the screen, tears falling. "Everyone's leaving me," she said. I knelt beside her, wiped her cheeks, and whispered, "I'm still here." She clung to me, oblivious to the irony. Their worlds were shrinking, walls closing in. I felt no pity, only focus. The final pieces were sliding into place. Monday broke them further. Ryan's car was gone when he woke. He texted me. Panicked? "Someone stole it." I replied, "That's insane. Call the cops." He did, but the tow report muddied it, leaving him stranded, broke, and fuming. His parents called him too. I'd sent them the beach photo unblurred, via mail with no return address. "They won't even talk to me," he told me later, voice raw. I pictured their disappointment, his golden image tarnished, and nodded into the phone. "Rough, man. Hang in there." Claire's collapse was quieter but deeper. Her parents emailed, a curt "We need space," and she read it aloud, sobbing. "What did I do?" she asked, turning to me. I shrugged, gentle. Maybe a misunderstanding. She didn't suspect the forged texts, the severed ties. Her design site, still hacked, now displayed a looping video, her and Ryan laughing, clipped from an old barbecue I'd filmed, edited to look intimate. Clients saw it. Her inbox filled with unprofessional complaints. She shut her laptop, retreated to bed, and I let her sink. I met Ryan for coffee that afternoon, his last gasp at normalcy. He looked like a ghost, unshaven, eyes sunken. "I've lost everything," he said, stirring his cup. I leaned in, voice low. "You'll rebuild." He didn't hear the edge, didn't see the trap. I paid, left a big tip, and walked out, knowing he wouldn't recover. That night, I sat with Claire, her head on my lap. She mumbled apologies. For what? She didn't know. And I stroked her hair, silent. The end was near, and it would be brutal. Tuesday was the crescendo. Ryan's eviction hit the local rumor mill. Someone posted about it online, tagging his old firm. "Karma," they wrote. He called me drunk, slurring about starting over somewhere else. I encouraged it. "Fresh start, man. You deserve it." He didn't catch the sarcasm. I'd mailed his landlord a forged lease violation, Claire's handwriting again, claiming he'd sublet illegally. The eviction stuck, his appeals ignored. Claire's ruin was public now. The video on her site went viral locally. Friends texted me. Awkward. "Is she okay?" I played dumb. She stressed. And let the whispers spread. Her last client, a charity, dropped her, citing reputational risk. She found out via email, screamed into a pillow, and I held her, whispering, "It's not your fault." She believed me, clinging to the only thing left, me. I staged the final act that night. Ryan crashed at a motel, broke and alone. I drove there, left an envelope under his door. Photos of him and Claire, timestamps from months back, paired with a note. "She's done with you. So am I." Not signed, but he'd know. Claire, sedated again, slept as I slipped into her email. sent a mass message to her contacts. I'm leaving Portland. Don't look for me. I shut her phone off, hid it, and waited. By morning, Ryan was gone. Checked out, no forwarding address. Claire woke to silence, no calls, no replies. She stared at me, lost. What's happening? I smiled, soft. Just us now. Wednesday was the end. Claire packed a bag, dazed, muttering about starting over. I didn't stop her. Let her think she had a choice. Her car keys vanished. Her accounts, hacked by me, showed zero balances. She turned to me, pleading. Help me, Dan. I looked at her, the woman I'd loved, and said, You're on your own. She left on foot, no plan, no one left to call. I watched her go, a shadow fading into the rain. Ryan surfaced days later. Nate spotted him online, begging for freelance gigs, his name Mud. He'd lost his family, his home, his pride. Claire drifted too. I heard she crashed with a distant cousin. Her career ashes, her spirit broken. I stayed in our house, alone, the silence my reward. I dismantled them, piece by piece, and felt no regret. The betrayal, her laugh, his grin, fueled me to the end. They'd thought they could take everything. I took it back and more. Now I rebuild. They don't.